Wanted to say a very warm welcome and thank you for being here. My name is Aiko Michot, and I am absolutely delighted to be with you to share what I'm most passionate about, which is promoting connection. My background is in mindfulness and nonviolent communication, and I'll be using these two principles and weaving them into our presentation. And the focus for this morning is in supporting connected conversations. And my portion of it for the first 2 hours will be really focusing on what are the conditions that support connected conversations. And then Yuri and Netra are going to come in after me. And they're actually going to be working with you on the mechanics of how do you do this connected conversation thing. Okay, so I wanted to start off with why I think this work is so important. And I think that the general sense that we have is that we are isolated and we need to go it alone. And there's something incredibly powerful when we pool our resources together and we discover actually that we can rely on one another to be able to get the support, the clarity that we need to be able to navigate any situation. I love this African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so there really is something beautiful that emerges when we are able to be together and contribute with our gifts to build something larger than what we could have imagined. And so the topic for today is really going to be, how do we build this connection? And one of the ways in which we are able to bring our inner world into the outer world and co-create a shared reality is through having connecting conversations. And so what do I mean by connected conversations? Well, this is a conversation where everybody feels safe to show up in their fullness, to be welcomed for their individual differences, to feel understood, seen, heard, respected, appreciated, and to know that they have something of value to contribute to the whole. And so I've been studying this for a while because this is certainly something that I want in my work life. And this is also something I want to bring into my personal life. And I've been really curious about what is it that gets in the way of us having connected conversations? Because we all have a lot of conversations throughout the day, but they don't always feel very connecting. So the first part of the presentation is going to be focusing on what gets in the way. And then the second half is, what are the conditions that actually support me being able to have connected conversations? And so I wanted to first be able to say and validate that having a conversation is really hard. I know we take it for granted and we do it a lot. However, there's a lot for us to deal with when we're engaging in something as dynamic as a conversation. Just the logistics alone of trying to figure out whose turn is it to listen or to speak, and how long is it okay for me to be speaking before I start running into issues that the other person doesn't feel heard or seen. Is there equity in this? There's also a lot to track, right? We're paying attention to the content, but not only are we paying attention to the content, there's all this nonverbal cues that are going on. And what is actually the underlying motivation for what the other is saying or for what I'm wanting to say? Am I able to articulate that in a way that it's able to be received? And then, of course, we're also tracking not what's just happening in the moment, but we're also tracking the outcome. Right? Is this person understanding what I'm saying? Am I understanding what they're saying? Are we talking about the same thing? And are we able to do so where we feel that we're doing this together, where there isn't a power dynamic in that conversation? And then oftentimes we don't think about this, but conversations are vulnerable because so many of our fundamental needs are tied in the act of having that conversation. The needs of mattering, of being understood, of having empathy from the other person, their willingness to see our reality. And a lot of times, in particular in work, our conversations have the need for competence. How I'm spending my time. Am I being effective? Is this conversation actually going towards the goal that we're wanting? So there's a lot that is involved in navigating a conversation. And if we layer on top of that, that what we're wanting is to have a connecting conversation, there is a lot that is involved. So what gets in the way of us having these connected conversations? I've come to the conclusion that there's two main things. The first thing is the state that we find ourselves in. If I am grounded, if my nervous system is regulated, what I find is that I'm actually available, I'm resourced, I have capacity to be open and receptive to not just what's going on internally with me, but what's going on with the other. Conversely, if I'm stressed, if I'm dysregulated, if I'm feeling undercapacitated or under-resourced, I'm not able to show up in my fullness, and most likely I am going to be defensive. And so our state really matters in how the conversation is going to go. The second thing that I have come to realize that gets in the way of connection is how attached I am to my reality. The thing is that we have different ways of seeing things, and one way is not necessarily right over the other way. However, if I'm very attached to my reality, if I have a positionality around what I think is true, there's a good chance that if the other person doesn't see things the same way I do, it's going to generate defensiveness from me, which of course is going to be felt by the other person, which is going to lead to disconnection. And so for this first part of the presentation, what I'd like to do is I'd really like to demonstrate how we can take ownership for our state and prepare ourselves before going into conversation by regulating ourselves or grounding ourselves. And then I want to talk about how our sense of reality forms and what are the pitfalls in being attached to that sense of reality. So before I get started with the first activity, just wanted to check in to see if there are any questions that emerged from what I just said, because I know that was a lot. And you can put that into the chat if you'd like, or you can unmute yourself. Really appreciate your share. I'm just curious, share of hands there, if you want to raise your hand or a thumbs up, that you're also noticing that having positionality gets in the way of having connected conversations. Yeah, I see some thumbs up as I scroll down over here. Yeah, it really does get in the way. So to address this, it really comes down to us, which is empowering, right? Because we can have influence on what the outcome is versus waiting on somebody else to give us the conditions for us to feel like we can be available. So I'm going to invite you to turn off your cameras actually right now. I'm going to invite us into a brief meditation, just for us to be able to experience what it's like to be able to regulate our own nervous system. So before we get started, just taking a moment to notice your state right now, how it feels in the body. Are you feeling grounded? Do you feel like you are fully here? What are your thoughts that are emerging? What's the pacing of those thoughts or the intensity of them? Is your attention gathered? Are you able to be here? Or is it being distracted? What's the energy level in your body? So we're just noticing our state as a baseline for comparison. And now what I'm going to invite you to do is, if you haven't done so already, let your eyes close and give yourself the permission to let go of any responsibility you might be carrying. Acknowledging that this is a pause for you, that you can be any way you happen to be in this moment. There's no pressure. And letting yourself drop from cognition into the body, feeling the body. Starting with maybe a few deep breaths, just as a way to connect. Feeling the chest cavity expand with the inhale and release with the exhale. Allowing yourself to feel the weight of the body pressing down. Feet on the floor. The sense of pressure of the legs on the chair. Noticing the sounds, the aromas in the room. Just widening the attention to take in the sensory. What it's like to be in experiencing. And as a close to this meditation, just checking in with the heart. Noticing if there's any emotions. Dropping in the question, how are you doing right now? And just offering interest and care with the attention to listen. And when you're ready, just noticing the state that you're in right now, what it feels like, tastes like. And just seeing if there's a difference to how you felt 5 minutes ago. And then gently resurfacing back into the room. Seeing where you are. And when you're ready, go ahead and rejoin us. And would love to hear from you what that was like, if anything came up in terms of, did you notice a change in the state? Do you feel the same way that you did just a little while ago? Yeah, I'm seeing definitely more grounded. Yeah, maybe just a thumbs up or a hands up for I feel different. I'm seeing calmer, more relaxed. Great. Present. Could feel myself thinking, let the mind relax. Yeah. And the thinking is okay, right? We're not trying to push anything away. We're just widening the scope of our attention to include other things outside of the thinking. And that brings balance. Yeah. Thanks for those thumbs up. Definitely more relaxed. Great. So this is really simple, right? What we just did and accessible. We can do this at work. We can also do this at home. And so the state really matters because that way we have more availability to ourselves. And the way that we're showing up has an impact on other people. Pausing, regardless of what the outcome is, allows the nervous system to absorb and to digest our experiences, to catch up so it doesn't feel so overwhelmed. And when it doesn't feel so overwhelmed, we actually have our full capacity. And this is where safety comes from. Oftentimes we think it comes from the outside circumstances. And that's a very dangerous link because if we're depending on outside circumstances being in a particular way, we're not going to feel safe very often because we can't control the outside circumstances as much as we try to. Safety comes from restoring our full capacity so that we can meet any circumstances in the most appropriate way. And being grounded where my needs are met make me available to authentically be there for somebody else. And so one of the things that we can do is check in with ourselves, right? This is the mindfulness bit. From time to time, check in. Am I feeling under-resourced? What can I do to get grounded? So the other thing I wanted to talk about, so we're looking at what causes disconnection, and we're saying that it's our state, but another aspect that really causes disconnection is our fixation over our reality. Having a fixation over reality gets us stuck. We're unable to see other bits of information, as well as it erodes connection because we're going to defend our reality. And that is really difficult if somebody's not on board with that reality. And so the question is, we tend to fixate a lot on our reality. Is it actually reliable? Is what we perceive necessarily translating into what's true? What are you seeing right now? This is a fixed image. It's just a picture. As I look at it, I see that there is a ball that's rolling, which is not necessarily what's true. The other thing is that if we stay long enough with a particular thing, our own perception changes. And this is really important to understand that our interest has an influence in how it shapes our reality. So into the chat right now, as you look at this image, what's the first thing that you see? Go ahead and put that in the chat. And you can check the chat and see that people are perceiving different things. And that changes. Right? I am looking at this and I'm seeing a young girl was the first thing I saw. And the longer I looked at it, I saw an elder. What about in this image right here? What's the first thing that you see? And you can once again notice how we all have different ways of seeing the same thing. I see two people, well, I see a person playing music and another listening, and I see two elders embracing. Who's right? Yeah, good observation, a cup as well in the middle. And so this goes to show that our perception changes, but not just our perception, we alone have different ways of noticing things. What about in this picture? What's the first thing that you notice? What do you think holistically as a whole? What is this picture? And if you were to look longer, what do you see? And if you were to consider changing, flipping your perspective to looking upside down versus upright, and just note once again in the chat how many different perspectives there are to this. And again, what's true? We're all unique. Even the way our brain is set up has its own preferences and its strengths. So what about on the picture of the right? What's the first thing that you see? It's so interesting. Most people are seeing a face. My predisposition is I'm very verbal. So I actually did not see the face when I first saw this picture. I saw the word. Do you guys see the word liar? Right? So again, if you have more of a verbal tendency, you might see the word first. That's my personal configuration. I don't have strength with facial recognition. It's really hard for me to remember people's faces, right? So again, it shows that we all have different abilities and we all have different perspectives, and that these are actually assets, these differences. And so with that, what if we were to shift the view that we have? Because oftentimes the way we look at differences and perspective is we see it as a problem, right? What if instead it were an asset? That these differences actually are what are able to strengthen a group of people. This would completely change our attitude around having different opinions. Okay, so with that said, I want us to try a different experiment. Okay, so this is another guided meditation. This one is an invitation for you to play with imagination. And the reason I want to do this exercise is I want to show you how we respond to imagination and how realities are formed. So I have a picture here of a busy street, which I was familiar with. But what we're going to do in this activity is I'm going to guide you into imagining yourself walking through a busy street. Are you ready? Okay, so once again, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes and just come back into the body. Feel your feet on the ground. The weight of your body pushing down into the chair. Letting the shoulders drop and the neck relax. Just feeling yourself here. And now we're going to invite the mind into an exercise of imagination. And I want you to imagine yourself walking down a busy street. It can be a street you know, or it can just be an imagined one that just unfolds. Hearing the sounds of the cars passing by. People walking towards you on the sidewalk. The details of the storefronts that you're passing. The feeling of the ground, the sidewalk as you are moving forward. The smells of that street. And as you're walking, you notice on the other side of the street, a cafe with an outdoor patio, and you see a coworker. And your coworker is drinking a cup of coffee, and you call out to your coworker. Your coworker looks up and you wave, calling them. They look at you. They grab their newspaper, fold it in half, stand up. You start walking towards them, but there's traffic in between you. Your coworker walks down the sidewalk, leaves the cafe, moving towards their car. Notice how you feel. The thoughts that emerge. Your state. And when you're ready, letting yourself come back to your room that you're in right now and dropping the imagination. What happened? Would love to hear from you what your experience was like. To be really supportive for the group. I'm hearing rude, uncomfortable, awkward, embarrassed, confused, kind of hurt. Are they in a hurry? I'm wondering, maybe they didn't see me. This happened a few times, embarrassed, disappointed. I'm an introvert. So I probably would have called out at them, okay? Wondering if they're okay. I knew they didn't like me. I love it. So this is just to show that all of these things that are arising are based on something that's not even true. We just imagined it. And if you didn't have the imagination, like if you didn't have the experience, that's okay. Because I bet you've all experienced having a really vivid dream, you know, one of those dreams that you wake up the next morning and you're having a hard time not believing it, and it affects the way you feel for the rest of the day. Okay, so our reality is very sticky, even if it's not true, even if it's not real. And our reality has this incredible capacity to generate a somatic, emotional, and a mental response. Just look at what we've seen happen in the chat. And so this is to show the impact of how reality forms very quickly, very easily, and what happens to us. So there's two phenomena I want to talk about, which really influence our ability to let go of our reality. One is that we tend to become enmeshed with the story, right? You could think about like watching a movie. You know it's fictional, you know, you're just watching a movie. But at some point, if the movie hooks you in, we become totally enmeshed. We don't exist anymore. We're completely absorbed in that reality, and we have real physical and emotional responses to what's happening. Do you know what I'm talking about? The other thing that happens is that we become identified with the story that we create. And what this means is somehow we make this story about us, right? And so this is the opposite of enmeshment. This is enmeshment, we're lost, we don't exist. And over-identification is it's all about us. The center of gravity is on us. And of course, we make it about them. Like, how could they not notice that I was here? How could they not look at me? I knew that they never liked me, right? So all of this is add on. And the invitation is to understand that this is something that happens. It's a mental phenomena, and it has real consequences both for ourselves and for other people. So how do we contend with this? Well, one way is we start to develop the skill for mindfulness, right? And mindfulness is being able to objectively witness what's going on without getting involved. And so I'm able to see that in this reality that I just created is I was walking down a busy street. I saw a coworker on the other side. I called out to them. They looked in my direction. They got up and they went to their car. That's it. Nothing added, which is very different than the other realities that the mind can generate. If we're able to stay in this objective witnessing and know that we have these tendencies towards enmeshment and towards fabrication that usually has a defensive tone. Did you notice? There's a defensive tone. That maybe we shouldn't be so attached to our reality. Because another component of the mind is that it has a negativity bias. What does that mean? It means that in any given moment where there's more positive or neutral things going on, where the attention automatically goes is to what's wrong. Did you notice that? This is something that we carry within us, and it's a evolutionarily biological condition that we have, that our default mode is to always be vigilant in scanning for danger. And so, of course, our default mode is of defensiveness. The other aspect is that this default mode, which happens even more frequently when we're dysregulated or triggered, creates a distorted reality. Because at the end of the day, safety is more important than accuracy. If I'm going on a hike at dusk and I see a dark shadow on the trail in front of me, and I imagine that it's a mountain lion and jump back, it's better for me to have a reaction that leads me to safety than me being accurate about what that is. Maybe it's a bear instead of a mountain lion, right? So it's just to show that having attachment to our reality should be up for questioning because we have these predispositions. And unfortunately, the result of having a negativity bias is that we're overprotective over ourselves. We do have a positionality. We're defended. We tend to see things through the lens of scarcity. And this is what creates a rift in connection. This is what creates a me versus you, or I'm right, you're wrong. And so it's important to understand these conditionings, not as a way to feel shame around how we are, but just what we're contending with. And so what gets in the way of connecting conversations? Well, our state is the number one thing. Being dysregulated or ungrounded. And the more dysregulated that we are, the more attachment we're going to have to our reality, and we're going to be defensive about it. Even if our reality is unreliable, meaning we know that our perception does not yield the absolute truth, and that we have a negativity bias, and it affects us, and worse yet, when we carry that reality out into the world, it affects others. How do we contend with this? Well, this is where we get to have influence. We can work on protecting our nervous system so that we stay grounded as much as possible. And what this does is it allows our full capacity to be available. And when we are capacitated, we feel safe. And these are the conditions for us to be open, to be curious about, is this really what's happening? And then also the view that differences are good. I can't do this alone. I actually need other people's perspective. I can rely on other people's perspective, that this is actually an asset to us, not a problem. So that was a lot said, and I want to, before we go into break, just check in with you and hear how this landed. Are there any questions or thoughts that come up with regards to what is it that interferes with our ability for connection? Does this land? Yeah, and it's okay if it doesn't, right? Again, the differences in our perspective will contribute to the whole group. So that's a lot to digest. Okay, I'm going to put you into breakout rooms and just give you an opportunity to connect with each other and just share out what was that like to go through the first half of this presentation? What's coming up for you or bubbling up as ideas? How does this land? Is there any exercise that brought up something new for you? Those of you that are here, if the breakout room didn't work, we can just do a discussion here about what that was like. And yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying is like how easy it is to get caught into something that's not even real. And we actually respond to it as if it were real. Yeah. The brain can't differentiate. Yeah, I call that the residue, like the residue I'm left with from an experience is just this felt experience that I'm carrying with me. And I can't really shake it off immediately when it's done. So, yeah, that's really interesting also that we create our realities before even something even happens. And that colors how we are and meet that experience. So I appreciate that. And we do this all the time, but we're not noticing because we're caught in that reality. And then we generate another one, right? So this is the other potential is we're generating new realities based on something that was never true to start off with. Yeah. It's pretty amazing what our mind can do. Very powerful gift, the imagination, but at the same time, can take us to places that we feel like we have no agency, right? We're caught. So thanks for that. If anybody wants, we can offer a little bit of space right now. What was that experience like? And what did you come to realize just from a simple exercise like that? That's a great point. There is so much information lost, right? When we're not face to face with another. I heard, and I don't know how they measure this in research, that 70% of communication actually comes from nonverbal cues. So not even what the person is saying, but how they're saying it, their facial expression, their posture. And this gives us clues about what the underlying motives are, right? And I don't know if you've ever experienced this. Sometimes the person that is speaking is not even aware of their underlying motives, but we're able to pick it up. So there is something that's absolutely lost in translation when we start to simplify and break down our communication. Just looking at the chat here really quickly. Yeah, it's important to be open, receptive, and not to be open just on one end. We don't always realize that people can share the same anxiety in communicating. Yeah. So the point of the exercise was just to show you that reality is generated and it takes very little to create a new reality, right? And notice the enmeshment that happened in the exercise, how quickly we went into the movie, where of course we're the protagonist, and how quickly that generated emotions and thoughts and opinions about the other. And none of it was true. None of it was real. And we're doing this all the time throughout the day, right? So it's just important to know that this is what we're carrying with us. And this is empowering to have this information because it really puts me in a place of starting to question the realities that I construct and allowing myself to be more open to checking in with others. Is this what's actually happening? Is this true for you? Right. And then also getting a sense of what is true for us, because the body will tell you, right? The body tells you if somebody is talking to you and they're insincere, or if their words are not in alignment with what their underlying motives are, which we can pick up, then our body produces a feeling of distrust. And so not only do we rely on nonverbal cues from the other to understand what actually is going on for them, we also rely on our ability to attune to our own body and our own emotions during conversation to know what actually is true for us. So I wanted to say a big thank you for you participating in this. I do want to make sure that you get a bio break. And during your break, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about a current challenge or conflict that you have at work. And if you can't think of anything at work, feel free to choose your personal life. And we're going to use that conflict or challenge as a way, as an exercise, as the topic for the exercises that we're going to do, so that you can potentially prepare yourself for having a connected conversation with this individual. All right, so the second half of the presentation, which is what are the conditions that support connected conversations? We looked in the first half, what gets in the way, which is basically our state, if it's dysregulated, as well as our attachment to our own reality, which can be very distorted and often comes with a negativity bias. So what is supportive? And this is really important to understand what the conditions are, because one, it's the foundation for having the conversation go the way we want it to, which hopefully is with connection and understanding. And this preparation that we do also empowers us to feel that we're entering a conversation with a lot of clarity about what our intentions are. So even if it doesn't go the way we want it to, we feel like we're in integrity. And so the conditions, which are the foundation to build a connected conversation, is safety, right? This is the first condition, is how can I show up in a way that feels safe to the other, as well as safe for myself? And a big part of that is the state that I'm in. How can I make sure that I am available, that I am present? Because this is what is needed to have an attitude that offers safety to the other person and also makes me available to get more information about what's actually happening during the complex dynamics of being in conversation. So the attitude really is that of openness. I'm not attached to my reality. I'm curious about yours. And then, of course, having the lens that if there are any differences in perspective, this is valuable information for me. Either it gets me to relook at what my reality is, or it gives me a clue as to what's going on with them. So I want to invite that. And so the encouragement is to be really intentional about your preparation before you go into conversations. I break it down into 5 steps, and I'll go over each one of these with a little bit more depth. So the first one is I check in with myself. What's my state? Am I grounded? Am I available? If I'm not, which often happens around sticky conversations where there's conflict or potential for conflict, I self-connect, which means I'm not sure that I'm going to get the empathy from the other person that I'm wanting. So I am going to assure that I get that from myself first. That way, when I'm going into the conversation, it doesn't matter how it goes. I am grounded in what is true for me, meaning what's going on in my body, what emotions I'm experiencing, not necessarily the story, but what's alive in me. And I'm not really needing them to see it because I already saw that for myself. And there's just a relief that comes from feeling that self-connection. This is what makes me available to be in a place where I'm curious. And if I'm curious, then I can investigate what actually is true. And then finally, once I've gone through this process, I've lowered my reactivity, I've opened myself up to the possibility of other realities, I can get really clear about what am I actually wanting about this conversation. And that way I have something to come back to when the conversation goes sideways. I know what my intention was, and I can keep returning to that over and over. And then finally, all this pre-work over here, I check back in myself. Are the conditions favorable to have a conversation? Is it the right time? Are they in a place where they can receive this? So let's try to do this with an exercise. Okay, so we'll go through all of the steps. And what I'd like you to do is I would like you to refer to the conflict or challenge that you are having at work or in your personal life that you thought about during your break. Okay, and we're going to do a guided meditation just so that you can go through the process of recognizing what your state is and going through the grounding process. So I'm going to invite you to come back to the body. Feel the feet on the ground. The pressure of the weight of your body against the chair. Taking a few slow breaths just to clear the space. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to bring to your mind this conflict or challenge that you might be experiencing with somebody at work or in your personal life. Let yourself feel it. And we're just going to do a quick assessment here. As you recall this conflict, what is your state? Are you feeling grounded and present with it? Or is this generating stress, defensiveness? Are you attached to your reality? Another way of looking at this is, do you feel that your sense of worth is dependent on them hearing and understanding you? That's generally a flag that I'm dysregulated. Another flag is there blame or judgment about what's going on or about the other person? It's not a problem. This is information. It tells us that our state is dysregulated. And so most likely there's going to be distortion, because when we're dysregulated, the attention narrows down and focuses usually on, with the negativity bias, what the problem is. And we don't see all the other data points. So we're just checking in and just noticing where we're at. And so with that, let's get grounded a little bit. The attention right now is fixated on content. Can you expand your attention to take other data points of this moment? Can you hear the sounds in the room? And also notice the sensations in the body as it's contracted around this story. Just widen your view to take that in. Can you feel yourself breathing, even if there's the story going on? Inviting a sense of presence. Okay, and then checking in again. What's the state that you're in? Is it the same as before? Right, this is self-regulation. I'm regulating my nervous system by expanding the attention to incorporate my body and my emotions, just so that everything is included. Okay, coming back to the room and just grounding yourself by looking around in the room and seeing where you are, right? Letting go of that virtual reality that we were just in. So one of the boundaries that we can create for ourselves is to not engage in conversation when we're feeling dysregulated. Or if the dysregulation starts to happen in the middle of the conversation, a boundary that we can set for the other person is, hey, I'm wondering if we can take a pause, because I'm noticing that I'm becoming really activated by what is being said. And I really want to stay open and receptive and hear what's going on for you. And I'm noticing that I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. Would it be okay for us to come back to this conversation after lunch? right? Or if we lose it, we can always ask for a redo, right? But these are some boundaries which are meant to protect the safety and the potential for connection and understanding. Okay, so just really curious in the chat, were you able to check in with yourself during that exercise and see what your state was? And what was your state? Seeing irritated before or after, before and after. It's nice to have a comparison. How was it before going into it and then after the exercise? I'm hearing anxious, immediately stressed out, tightness, difficult to let go. Yeah, that identification becomes really strong in the enmeshment, in particular when we're triggered. Stressed, yeah. So we can see how our state is very affected by the reality that we engage in. Need to remember to breathe. Shame. Yeah, a lot of emotions that come up. And I appreciate the shares about the emotions or the somatic state, right, of the body, like what's going on, because it gives us information about our openness and our availability, and also the information that the body is giving us, right? The body's constantly offering feedback. Yeah, I'm seeing difficulty in absorbing information, and it affects us also on a cognitive level. Great. So oftentimes, the way we relate to emotions is that we have a positionality about it, right? We have this positionality that we should be experiencing pleasant emotions and avoid the unpleasant emotions. And I just want to flip this a little bit and invite you to view emotions, in particular ones that are uncomfortable or challenging, as really valuable information, right? The body is telling us through the emotions about which needs are not being met. And oftentimes when we go into a conversation, we are fixated on the content. But if we were able to drop below the content and pay attention to the emotions that are happening, those emotions give us information about the needs that are not being met if they happen to be uncomfortable emotions, right? So me feeling angry might give me information that I'm really wanting to matter right now, or I'm really wanting to be understood, which gives me information about I'm really wanting connection. I'm really wanting shared reality, right? And so that the attention is going to the correct place. And by having clarity to what our needs are that are being unmet, we're able to articulate that in a way that another person might be able to relate to, right? Like, I am really wanting connection versus here's what you're doing that I don't like, right? Which is going to have a completely different impact on the person. And so just to keep this in mind, also when we're thinking for ourselves about our version of the story, what's actually wanted in this moment? What's important? Is it really about what I'm saying I want? Or is there something else that's driving all the content that I'm captivated by? So the second step in this process is self-connection. And I like to think of self-connection as a way for empathy. I'm giving myself empathy by turning my attention inwards and noticing what's alive inside of me. And part of being able to have access to this is to have an environment internally where there is absolute permissiveness, meaning there's no shame around how I'm feeling. There's no right or wrong way to be. I get to be myself. And there's something about that permissiveness that allows for the fullness of the experience to come out so that I can have access to more information to have a better sense of what actually is true. So what I'd like you to invite you to do is let's take a moment to write about this challenge or conflict. And I want you to let loose. Nobody's going to read this. You can write this on a piece of paper. If you don't have paper and pen available, you can open up a document that you delete later. Give yourself the space to self-express uninhibitedly. So go ahead and set a timer for about 3 minutes. It doesn't matter if you get everything down on the paper. It's more about being able to self-express. And what I'd like you to do also, if possible, is while you're doing this, start to track what it feels like. What's the things that come up as you're writing, the emotions and what's going on with the body, and what's it like to actually be given permission to be your full self. Those of you that finished already, just tracking how you're feeling and what the impact was of just being able to write. I realize that that's not enough time for a lot of folks. I just wanted to have you taste the experience of what it's like to be given permission to express yourself, right? And by doing so, it relieves some of the dysregulation that's going on, because the dysregulation is our system telling us something needs attention here. I need you to pay attention to this. And oftentimes we're looking for that attention externally. But just by being able to offer that to ourselves, there is a little bit of relief that comes from that, because at least our body knows that now this is in consciousness so that we can do something about it. So the next step in the exercise is really, let's go below the content. What are you feeling in this conflict? I know you're feeling stressed, but let's expand the vocabulary. You were given a feelings and needs list. For those of you that don't have it, let me go ahead and find a link that I can drop into the chat. And see if you can expand the vocabulary beyond I'm feeling mad, angry, right? Sometimes there's things that are underneath the anger, which is a protective feeling to shield us from the vulnerability that's underneath that. So what are you feeling? I love that some of you are putting that in the chat. That's wonderful. Thanks. And you don't have to, you can just put this on your paper if you want. Yeah. And really urge you to look at that feelings list, because there's so many words there to describe the full range of possibility of what we're experiencing. And oftentimes it's hard to know what we feel. Yeah, grief oftentimes is at the very bottom. When you start peeling all the layers of emotions and feeling anxiety, and then there's anger, and then there is, usually as we peel down the layers, grief, hurt. Yeah. I love that writing it down helps release some of the anger of not being heard. Yeah, it's wonderful how we can meet our own needs. Right? We don't need to be dependent on others. And our need to be seen and heard can be met just by turning our attention inwards. Self-connection is so important. It gives us empowerment. We can meet these needs for ourselves. And it takes the pressure off the other. Okay. If you feel like you've been able to determine your emotions, go ahead and check out what you might be wanting, right? And that's in the needs list, that usually unpleasant emotions point to unmet needs. So I've gone ahead and put the link to the needs list if you don't have it. And really let yourself scan through those and circle the ones that resonate. That there might be things on that list that you didn't even think about, but that are there and can be really helpful to get clarity. Respect. Support. To be heard. Yeah. Community. Beautiful. Rest, relaxation. To see and be seen. Harmony. Notice as we start dropping down to the need level, there's just something very beautiful. Safety, peace of mind, collaboration, authenticity, integrity. When we get down to the needs and we get clarity about what is wanted, something opens. Involved, optimism. And this is what we can offer as a gift to the other in the conversation, right? Versus us having our demands, versus us getting totally distracted by the content of the story, which is unreliable to start off with. What is reliable is the need that's driving the story. And think about how different that would be when we show up and it's just like, actually, what I'm really wanting is collaboration versus, you know what? I don't like it when I'm trying to work with you and you do so-and-so, right? Completely different impact. We can point the attention down to what matters. And when we focus on what matters, that generates connection. Even if the other person's not in agreement, there is a level of respect for being vulnerable to share what that need is, because that's the same need that I have. We all share the same fundamental needs as human beings, and that's relatable. And so all of this process of self-connection gives us clarity, as well as the empathy that we're yearning for when we go into conversation with the other. So we've taken care of some of that. And what this does is it decreases the charge of what I'm feeling and the demand I'm coming into, wanting the other person to give me what I need, right? It's released a little bit. There's less pressure. And when there's less pressure, there's safety. So the other person's more willing to listen versus defend themselves against us. Okay, just a moment to reflect. How do you feel after going through this exercise? Is there a strong charge still? Has it deactivated a little bit what you were experiencing? Or do you feel the same? It's really important that even though I'm proposing these processes, that it resonates with you. So just check in with yourself and see, does that work? And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, hey, we'll try something else. Yeah, the needs list was very helpful in discharging some strong feelings. Great. Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. Yeah. Yes, great. Okay. So we've looked at how do we create the conditions for connecting conversations. So we checked ourselves, what's our state, right? And then we did a little bit of self-connection to make sure that we got a chance for self-expression, and we also met our need for empathy, and we got some clarity around what it is that we're wanting. Great. So the boundary that we have is that if we're still feeling very activated after going through this process of self-connection, we're still not ready, which means that we need more empathy. We need more time to self-express. And that might be where maybe I call a friend that's not involved in the conflict and doesn't know the party that's involved, and I ask for an empathy call. Hey, I'm going through a really hard time. I'm needing to be able to process this with someone. Would you be willing to just hold space for me so that I can express what's going on? without offering advice. Like, could you do that for me? Could you just listen, right? And let yourself self-express in a container that is safe. So you're not going into an unsafe, challenging situation of your existing conflict. You are letting yourself experience that empathy someplace where it's on your terms and it's safe, okay? Yeah, we can set the parameters in advance for what we're wanting. And it's helpful to the other person also to know how they can help, right? Because we want to help, but sometimes we're not really sure how to do that. So the benefits of self-connection is, as you've seen, we get clarity and we get our needs met for mattering because we turn our attention to ourselves and shown that we matter, being heard and understood. And what I think is really pivotal here is there's a sense of empowerment, meaning I'm not depending on the other person in my conversation to understand me or give me the empathy. I mean, I'm hoping for that, but I'm not dependent on that for me to get the empathy that I need. I've taken care of that for myself. And this allows me to enter the situation feeling less triggered, more aware about what's alive inside of me and grounded as a result of that. And so that I can have a more productive conversation. Yeah, I'm just reading in the chat over here. Sometimes empathy calls can go sideways. Yeah, and a big part of that is because oftentimes people don't know how to offer empathy. And so what we can do is we can support them by letting them know what works for us. Right. So for me, I actually don't like people to speak when I'm speaking. I just want to speak uninterrupted. And their presence and their interest soothes me. And so that's what I ask. Would it be okay for you to just listen to me for 5 minutes and not offer me advice, but just hold me with presence and support, just so I can get this off my chest? Once we are deactivated, step 3 is about getting curious. This is where we have enough availability of resources to be open to the possibility that maybe there's some distortion going on with my reality, right? And so are there any assumptions that might not be true? Or what are some missing data points that I hadn't considered before that actually make up this conflict, right? Because when, again, we're triggered, our mind, the negativity bias, is going to hone in on certain data points at the exclusion of others. Am I able to consider other data points? So in your same writing exercise, go ahead and see if there's questions that you have about this current conflict or challenge that you might want more information about, or you're not sure if it's really true. You can read over what you wrote and just see if there's any areas that feel like there's some exaggeration or maybe distortion. And again, there's no judgment in this process, right? We're trying to be objective about what's going on. So I'll give you a couple of moments. We'll do 2 minutes in silence so you can look at that. I'm going to interrupt just a little bit here. I've just been tracking the chat, and I'm seeing that it's hard to feel willing to see their point of view, but not feel like they're willing to see yours. So yeah, sometimes there's an inequity that happens, right? That you're totally open and you're curious, but they're not reciprocating that. And it's not always going to be on the same playing field. Keep in mind that they are very attached to their reality, right? Keep in mind that they're dysregulated. They don't even have the capacity to listen or see beyond what is true for them. And that's where our curiosity can disarm the defensiveness of like, hey, I'm noticing that this is really important to you. Are you feeling this because you're needing this? Right? Or, hey, I'm noticing that this is really activating for you. Maybe this isn't a good time. Would you like to come back and to talk about this at a time that's more convenient for you? Right? So we can always step in. If we are grounded and we are present, we're able to receive the other in whatever state that they're in. We might not agree with it, we might not like it, but we can hold it as in they're in a place of a lot of dysregulation. And the distortions that are there are nothing personal. I'm not identifying with what they're saying, right? That's their reality. And we already know that everybody's reality is distorted. So I don't even engage with that. I engage with their pain. And I am able to do so if I've already taken care of engaging with my pain first. This is really important. And this is why the self-connection piece is essential. Because if you're coming in already with the feeling of like, hey, I'm doing this, but they're not doing this back, and there's a charge around it, it means that you need more empathy so that you're not dependent on the other offering you understanding and listening, right? Of course, that's important. I don't want to invalidate that, but I'm saying there's a lot that we can do to take care of ourselves. Okay. If you haven't gotten to this part yet, take a moment to take guesses. What do you think is going on for them? Using the feelings and needs list, what might they be feeling? And what needs do those point to that might be unmet? If you are done with assessing their feelings and needs, go ahead and do a self-check with yourself and see how this exercise impacted you. Has it helped get a little bit of perspective about the reality you came in with? And I'm just looking over here in terms of needs that they might be wanting: appreciation, autonomy, respect, value. Great. Maybe they're in the same boat as you are, or they're bound by some other responsibilities. Yeah, I like the question. Why don't we just ask the other person what their needs are in the conflict? Why do we guess? And that's a great question. And the reason for that is that this shift where we are becoming interested in the other person's needs is important in us being able to consider what alternative reality actually is happening versus the one that I'm believing. Right? So that what I'm doing is I'm preparing to go into this conversation with the detachment of my own reality. So this process of doing the work ahead for myself and guessing at their feelings and needs loosens the enmeshment that I have with my reality so that I can consider something else. And I think it's a great idea when you do go into the conflict, being really direct. Hey, your needs matter to me, and I really want to know what's going on for you. Would you be willing to share that with me? So that works as well. There is a possibility that the other person won't know, or maybe they don't feel safe enough to be honest because their need is really vulnerable. So I'm really curious in terms of, did this help deactivate a little bit how you were feeling about the situation? Okay, so this is actually for you. This is not for the other person. We're still, the focus of attention is on you. Okay. Okay. So the boundary that we can set here, if the person's really wanting to engage, if they're really wanting resolution, right? And we don't feel that we're clear on what's actually happening, our boundary could be like, I'm not ready to make this decision right now. I'm needing more information. Would you be willing to tell me, why is this so important to you? Right, so we can set the boundary. We don't need to be pushed into a situation that we don't feel comfortable with if we're not ready. Or we can be very transparent. That's another boundary, is transparency. Here's what's going on for me. And I'm really wanting collaboration. I'm really wanting, shared reality. But I'm having a little bit of trouble trusting. And here's what would help me trust. Would you be willing to tell me more about, etc.? Right? Yeah, I like the comment of the other person's reality could become your burden. It only becomes a burden if we believe it. Right? Remember, at the beginning of the presentation, no reality is an absolute reality. That's their thing. right? That doesn't mean it's true. And it doesn't mean that we need to take it on. We can validate it by listening, but as long as we don't become enmeshed, as long as we don't believe what's happening, we're not going to feel the emotional residue, right? So once again, radical self-responsibility is our doorway to freedom, right? In this understanding that what they're going through, that's their version. That's not, I don't need to take that on, but I can offer the safety for them to self-express if I've taken care of my needs for regulation, presence, so that I can really show up authentically curious. And if those needs haven't been taken care of, I'm not going to offer that, right? I'm going to take care of my needs. And I'm going to do that through steps 1 and 2, right? Grounding, self-connection, until I can get to the point where I can genuinely be curious. If there's still resistance to being curious, that means that go back to step 1 and 2. We're not at step 3. It's really important to respect your own needs. Okay, I'm going to move on. So thank you for all the comments in the chat. Number 4, get clear on what it is that you want. Okay. Oftentimes the attention goes to what we don't want. And that's what generates conflict. Point the attention to what actually matters, so that you're clear when you're coming into the conversation about what you're wanting. So if I'm going into the conversation saying that feels disrespectful, right? I don't want you to disrespect me. That is vague. I'm not really sure what disrespect means to you. I don't know what I've done. It's more informative if you tell me what it is that you're wanting, right? What I'm really wanting is I'm really wanting to be heard without being interrupted, right? That's specific. I'm feeling disrespected when somebody interrupts me, but being able to be very clear to them about what I'm wanting is helpful to them, for them to understand what is the behavior that's generating the conflict. And then the other thing is to make the request, if I'm asking them, doable. So if I'm asking them, I'd really like to be heard without being interrupted. The question that comes up for me is like, well, how long do I have to listen to you before I get to say what's going on for me? And so making it doable is like, I'd really like to just share what's going on for me. It's probably going to take about 3 to 4 minutes. And I'd like that to be without interruption. Would you be able to hold the space for me to do that? And then I want to hear how that lands for you and what that brings up for you. Right? So we're being very specific and clear, and we're still holding the connection there. Any questions about this? Okay, so we're going to do this very briefly here, just 2 minutes. This is going to take more than 2 minutes, but you can work on this after the workshop. For your conflict that's going on, what are you actually wanting? Not what you don't want. What do you actually want? And you can look at your needs list, right? What are the needs you want met? And then try to frame that in a way that's specific and doable to the other person. All right, I love what's showing up here in the chat. So I'm seeing clear, understandable communication. That's great. It lets me know about the communication piece, but clear, I'm not sure if that's specific or doable for me, as well as understandable. Can I finesse that even more? What specifically can I do? What kind of communication are we looking for? So for cooperation, knowing that we're on the same team, what action can the person take that will let you know that we're on the same team? Right? How can the person cooperate, demonstrate to them their cooperation? And I know that this is tricky, right? This is not easy. Yeah, I love that response of they can repeat back to me what they understand about what I just said to them. And that allows for clarity and clear communication, and to self-correct if necessary. I love also the share about timing is everything. And I know that this exercise requires more time, and I'm going to move us along because I'm just wanting to expose and touch upon some of these things that you can do. But really to consider, ask for what you want, but make sure that if it doesn't happen, it's not because of a misunderstanding. So we can do this as showing our request as really being specific and easy for the other person to do. So the last portion in our preparation to go into conversation is really, once again, reevaluating if the conditions are right. And remember that safety is a key part of that. So, does this feel safe for us? And safety comes from restoring our full capacity to know what to do and to be available. So oftentimes we think it's external circumstances, but we can actually take responsibility for our own safety by grounding, by getting access to our full capacity, feeling the body, knowing the emotions as they arise, having the capacity to see how that links into our needs, being able to ask for boundaries when they are needed. So when we come into the conversation and we have our state of presence available, we will know how to navigate something that feels unsafe. Have you done your self-connection? Are you really showing up in a place of curiosity and wanting connection and understanding? And then, of course, there's logistical constraints, right? We already mentioned timing. Like, is this the right time? If it's not going to be connecting the conversation if there's stress. Is there privacy? Is there a power dynamic? And if you are in that power dynamic and you are the person that is in the place where there is more power, acknowledging that when you're talking to the person, right? I'm realizing that I'm your boss. And there is a power dynamic here. And I just want to let you know that I'm aware of that. And I'm still very interested in what you have to say. And I understand if it feels uncomfortable sharing, and you absolutely don't need to if this feels unsafe to you. Can you let me know what would be the conditions to offer you safety in this moment so I can hear what's alive in you? Right. And then this part I think is really important, and we don't think about this, is there consent for the conversation? How many times have I had people barge into my office and just start talking at me when I'm in the middle of something? Like, is it just because you talk, there's just this agreement that I should listen? Right? So just being aware of that when you're approaching somebody for a conversation, checking in if they are okay with that, versus creating a innocent but unconscious transgression, right? Hey, I would really like to talk to you about this, whatever the thing is. And I'm wondering if right now is a good time. And if right now is not a good time, what would be a good time for you? Because I want to make sure that we talk about this. This feels important to me, and I want to get your feedback on that, right? So all of these things are things that we can do before entering a conversation. And if we have done our work, which is for us, not for the other person per se, right? It allows us to show up in a way that is in our fullness, right? In our full capacity. And that fullness allows others to be safe, because they are not feeling that there's any withholding. They are grounded in your groundedness. When I show up and somebody's very activated and I'm absolutely grounded, and everything that they're throwing at me, I just respond still with interest and curiosity. What that does is it allows them to settle. And what emerges from that, when we are in an environment where we can hold each other by understanding that everybody has their own reality, it's distorted because that's just the nature of things. In a sense, we're innocent because all we're trying to do is meet our fundamental needs. And we all share those same fundamental needs. Then what we can do is we can have compassion. We can have more understanding. We don't take things so personally. And what emerges is a work environment that feels safe, where we can collaborate, where we can do meaningful work, where we can focus our attention on our shared values and embrace the differences as really a strength to the group. So I want to be cognizant of your time, and I know I've just downloaded a lot of information. This is actually, you got the summary of like a 6-month course that I normally do, and wanted to let you know that if you are curious about mindfulness or nonviolent communication, you can take a screenshot of this. This is my website, and this is where I have offerings that I share. So I wanted to say a big thank you for your valuable time and attention. I hope that this offered some different perspectives and felt that there are different ways for relating to our reality, and hopefully gives you some different ideas of things that you can try so that you can have more connection in both your work life and in your personal life. And we absolutely are our biggest resources. And when we come together, it's unimaginable the problems that can be solved and the solutions that come up when we feel safe and we're able to collaborate and be creative. And not to mention the beauty of the intimacy of really connecting with people on a real level. And so Nature and Yuri will be following this up with how to bring realness into conversations. So I'm very excited about that. And once again, just wanted to say a big thank you. Feel free to reach out to me. My email in the chat. It's Aiko at rememberingtruenature.com. Remembering true nature as in this, our true nature is one that is loving and compassionate and wants to foster understanding and care. So that could be one way that you remember it. So, thank you again.